Back entrance is around the side. That is where the cleaning crew goes. Cole Bennett said it with a slow curl of his lip, moments before he lifted the large cup in his hand and let the burning coffee fall straight across Naomi Harper's chest, soaking her coat, her blouse, and the dignity she carried into the building. The heat pierced her skin in a violent wave. She gasped as the liquid ran down her arms, dripping onto the polished floor while laughter rose behind her. The humiliation struck harder than the burn, and in that instant, though no one around her knew it yet, this single act would become the moment that ended entire careers, shattered reputations, and forced a reckoning that Innovatech Solutions could never again escape. The downfall of everyone involved had already begun. But for now, Naomi stood still, shaking, breath tight in her throat, surrounded by the echo of cruel laughter in a lobby built from glass and hollow pride. Before going further into this story, take a moment and tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel and give me a like. Your support helps these stories reach more people who care about justice and human dignity. Naomi Harper had walked into Innovatech Solutions with a calm purpose and a simple hope. It was 8:45 on an ordinary Wednesday morning when she stepped into the building her husband had built from nothing but vision and relentless effort. She had planned to surprise him before a major meeting on diversity and equity, a meeting she had encouraged him to schedule. Though she never intended her presence to be part of the agenda, she wore a tailored cashmere coat, soft to the touch and warm against the mild California morning. She carried an elegant bag, unmistakable to anyone who paid attention. Yet none of that mattered when she crossed the threshold, to Cole. Her presence was a challenge to his authority, which rested on a narrow understanding of who belonged in such a space. His eyes had followed her from the moment she entered, measuring her not by her grace, her intelligence, or her quiet confidence, but by the color of her skin, by the assumptions that governed his world view, and by the disdain he carried like a shield. He stepped toward her with a practiced smirk, as though he had been waiting all morning for someone like her to walk through the door. His colleagues, Haley Sullivan and Madison Reed, watched him circle her with thin amusement, already preparing to laugh at whatever he planned to do next. Naomi felt their eyes before she heard their words. She had spent years in the tech world, rising through teams and projects until the weight of quiet bias became too much to carry. She had questioned unfair evaluations, pointed out patterns of exclusion, and offered solutions that were dismissed with polite indifference. She had been told she was too direct, too emotional, too focused on race, and not collaborative enough. In truth, she was clear, disciplined, and unwilling to ignore harm when it stood in plain sight. After years of fighting battles no one else would name, she stepped away from her engineering career to become an independent consultant, determined to help companies confront the very systems that once drove her out. She never imagined that she would face her most painful test not as an employee but as a guest in the company her husband led. When Cole poured the coffee, Haley gasped and then laughed, a sharp sound that bounced off the glass walls. Madison covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked, but her eyes glowed with approval. Naomi asked for a supervisor with quiet steadiness, her voice firm through the pain. Haley stepped closer and said, "Do you even have an appointment?" In a tone that mocked both Naomi's presence and her restraint, Madison added, "This area is for approved visitors only," as though Naomi had committed a crime by standing there. Curious employees drifted closer, drawn to the scene like spectators to a spectacle. Phones appeared, whispered comments floated through the air. No one stepped forward. No one offered a tissue, a towel, or a hand. Naomi stood alone in the center of a growing circle of onlookers, her clothes soaked, her skin burning, her dignity under attack. Greg Donovan arrived minutes later, rigid and impatient, a man who had spent years defending the structure that kept him comfortable. He listened first to Cole, Haley, and Madison, nodding along with their story before he even looked at Naomi. When he finally did, his expression carried suspicion, not concern. He said she seemed elevated, a word that suggested she was the problem, not the people who had assaulted her. Naomi asked again for access to a restroom so she could clean herself, but Greg refused. He said policies were policies. He said procedures had to be followed. He said he wanted to keep the lobby orderly. Every word made it clear that he saw her as the disruption, not the victim. She tried calling Ethan, but his line went to voicemail. She did not want to draw him away from important meetings. She simply wanted to be treated with humanity. Yet humanity was the one thing no one around her felt obligated to show. The employees who watched the scene unfold faced their own silent conflicts. Grace Park stood near the elevator. Clutching her coffee with trembling hands, she had once defended a young intern who faced biased treatment, and she remembered the cold distance her colleagues showed her afterward. Malik Thompson, a security guard and former military member, recognized Naomi from photos in Ethan's office but hesitated. Torn between protocol and conscience, Lauren Mitchell watched with uncertainty. Unsure how far she was allowed to intervene, Sofia Alvarez felt the sting of recognition, but remained frozen by fear of professional backlash. Only Kevin Nguyen, quiet and thoughtful, took out his phone not to mock, but to record the truth. As the minutes stretched into a painful eternity, the humiliation deepened. Cole repeated his mockery. Haley smirked. Madison whispered to an employee standing beside her. Greg folded his arms and insisted that Naomi leave before she caused further disturbance. It was then that Naomi lifted her chin and said, with calm strength, "I am Naomi Harper. I am the wife of Ethan Harper." The room fell silent for a breath. Then Cole laughed again and said, "And I am married to a superstar." The crowd laughed with him. Tyler Brooks lifted his phone and posted a second video to the company Slack channel, mocking her claim. The clip spread instantly. Employees watching from upstairs sent emojis. Comments poured in. A painful spectacle had become a joke in a company that claimed to be progressive. Naomi stood in the center of the chaos, coffee dripping from her sleeves, surrounded by a culture that had revealed its true face. She did not raise her voice. She did not lash out. She simply waited, steady and silent, knowing that this moment, as cruel as it was, would expose everything the company had hidden for years. And when Ethan finally walked through those glass doors, the cost of this morning would fall like a hammer across every life that chose cruelty over conscience. The laughter rose again before the sting of the spilled coffee had even faded from Naomi Harper's skin. A cold reminder that cruelty, once unleashed, rarely stops with the first blow. And the moment Cole Bennett leaned back against the reception counter with a proud smirk. The tone of the entire lobby shifted from a moment of shock into an open spectacle, as if the pain inflicted on one woman belonged to everyone around her as a form of entertainment. Naomi remained steady, her breath slow, her hands trembling only slightly as she wiped the burning liquid from her coat, asking once more for a restroom so she could clean herself. Haley Sullivan stepped forward instead, voice sharp with false courtesy, reminding Naomi that facilities were for employees and scheduled guests only, as though the simple act of offering help would threaten the structure of the building. Madison Reed echoed the refusal with a polite smile, one that deepened the humiliation rather than softened it. Cole continued circling her with quiet insults meant to pierce her composure. He remarked on the way she stood, on the way she spoke, on the way she entered the lobby as though she belonged here. The employees nearby leaned in, some openly curious, others whispering, all contributing to a rising atmosphere of mockery that seemed to grow heavier by the second. Tyler Brooks appeared at the edge of the crowd, phone already raised. eyes wide with excitement, eager to capture the scene before anyone dared to intervene. Without hesitation, he posted the clip to the company's internal Slack channel, tagging the random group where hundreds of employees would see it instantly. The caption read, "Lobby drama this morning." The message spread at once, drawing amused reactions from team members upstairs who had no idea who Naomi was, no idea what had been done to her, and no interest in questioning the truth behind the laughter. Within minutes, multiple employees walked down the stairs to the lobby, drawn by the digital commotion and the promise of a scene that made them feel both superior and entertained. Naomi felt their eyes as they gathered, creating an unspoken wall around her, a circle that allowed no escape and no dignity. She asked again, with controlled grace, to speak to a manager, to access a restroom, to receive basic respect. Haley dismissed the request with a simple wave of her hand, repeating that Naomi did not appear to have an appointment, that she needed to wait, that she needed to lower her tone, even though her voice had never risen. Halfway across the building, Greg Donovan received the call he had hoped to avoid, a call that required him to step into a situation he believed should have ended with a simple apology from Naomi rather than accountability from his staff. He walked into the lobby with the stiff posture of a man protecting the system he had built his career upon. He listened first to Cole and Haley, nodding as they spoke over one another, offering explanations that carried no truth but matched his expectations. He turned to Naomi only after forming his conclusion. "I am told this was an accident," he said calmly, as though that settled the entire matter. "And I am also told that your reaction has become elevated." The word cut through the air with practiced precision, shifting blame back onto the victim, framing Naomi as unstable, unreasonable, and unworthy of consideration. Naomi met his eyes and spoke with quiet dignity, explaining that the coffee had been poured on her intentionally, that assistance had been denied, that she had been mocked for nearly 10 minutes, and that all she requested was a restroom to clean herself. Greg paused only long enough to show that he had heard her, then repeated that facilities were for employees, that lobby order must be maintained, and that she would need to leave if the situation continued to escalate. The crowd tightened around them as more employees approached from every corner of the building. Phones remained raised, whispered jokes continued. Naomi, now soaked, shaken, and visibly humiliated, asked once more to call her husband, but the call went to voicemail, as he was in the middle of an investor session and the building's poor reception blocked his notifications. She stood still, her composure both a shield and a burden, aware that every passing second deepened the cruelty of the moment. Tyler posted another video to Slack, captioned, "She is saying she is the boss's wife," followed by an emoji that mocked her credibility. The message traveled instantly. Upstairs, employees laughed, typed comments, and asked for more updates. Some came down to record their own footage, eager to capture a moment of public humiliation they believed carried no consequences. In the midst of the rising chaos, several witnesses stood frozen in their own internal battles. Grace Park watched from near the elevator, heart pounding, remembering the last time she defended a young intern and the cold distance her colleagues gave her afterward. She wanted to step forward, yet fear held her still. Malik Thompson, a black security guard with a military background, recognized Naomi from framed photos in Ethan's office and felt a tightening in his chest. Torn between following strict protocol and protecting a woman he knew did not deserve this. Lauren Mitchell hovered near the hallway, uncertain of her authority. Sofia Alvarez remained rooted in place, fighting the shame of staying silent. Only Kevin Nguyen acted with intention. He lifted his phone, but not to mock or ridicule. He recorded because he understood, more clearly than the others, That truth needed witnesses, especially in a building where silence often protected the wrong people. As the minutes dragged on and the circle around Naomi grew thicker, Greg repeated that she was causing a disruption. He insisted that she leave before the situation worsened, and then, with a calm resolve that cut through the noise, Naomi said, "My name is Naomi Harper. I am the wife of Ethan Harper." Her voice did not shake. Her eyes did not waver. For one brief moment, the lobby stilled. A single breath passed through the crowd. Then Cole burst into laughter, clapping his hands and looking back at the others with theatrical disbelief. "Sure," he said loudly. "And I am married to a superstar." The crowd erupted with more laughter. Tyler typed another update on Slack. The ridicule deepened. Naomi stood alone in a circle of glass, surrounded by people who believed her suffering was a performance created for their amusement. And yet, beneath the laughter, the downfall of every person who chose cruelty over conscience had already begun. Though none of them sensed the shadow of consequence moving toward them with the steady certainty of truth. The silence that settled over the lobby was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating kind that reveals the true nature of a place. The kind that shows who stands for dignity and who hides behind the safety of passivity. And as Naomi Harper stood shaking in her coffee-soaked coat, every eye in the room fixed on her with a tension that felt colder than the liquid dripping from her sleeves, while the employees who had gathered around her seemed to collapse inward beneath the weight of their own hesitation. Malik Thompson and Lauren Mitchell, the two security guards summoned to the scene, stepped toward the crowd with practiced caution. Malik recognized Naomi instantly, not because she was famous, but because her photograph sat framed on Ethan Harper's desk, a gentle reminder of the life Ethan cherished outside the relentless demands of leadership. Malik's breath tightened as he took in the sight before him, the humiliation, the burns, the cruelty. Yet he hesitated, torn between the rigid protocols drilled into him and the moral clarity rising in his chest. Lauren stood beside him with confusion written across her face. She did not know who Naomi was, yet she sensed something deeply wrong. She had seen difficult guests before, but she had never witnessed a situation where a woman soaked in hot coffee was treated with such open disdain. Still, she said nothing, uncertain of her authority and frightened of choosing the wrong side in a company where loyalty to the system was valued more than basic conscience. Near the elevator, Grace Park clutched her cup with trembling fingers, watching the scene unfold with growing dread. She remembered the last time she had defended a young intern who faced biased treatment from a senior engineer. The retaliation was subtle yet unmistakable. Projects reassigned, meetings overlooked. Her reputation reshaped into a narrative of someone who was difficult and overly sensitive. She had worked tirelessly to rebuild her standing, and now, staring at Naomi in the center of the circle, she felt the old conflict return with painful intensity. Her voice pressed against her throat, desperate to speak, but the fear of professional consequence held her still. She lowered her gaze toward the floor, ashamed, angry, and painfully aware of her own silence. Across the lobby, Sofia Alvarez stood motionless, feeling an ache in her chest as she watched Naomi struggle to hold her dignity. She knew what humiliation felt like. She knew what it meant to be dismissed, ignored, or minimized. Her instinct urged her to move forward, yet something colder and heavier held her back, a fear that stepping in would place a target on her own back, one she had worked too hard to avoid. Around her, whispers spread through the crowd, conversations full of assumptions, comments that dismissed Naomi's requests. No one questioned the story offered by Cole, Haley, or Madison. No one questioned why a woman soaked in coffee would stand firm instead of leaving. No one questioned why she was denied access to a simple restroom. Instead, they watched, convincing themselves that silence was harmless, when silence was the very weapon enabling cruelty. Amid this gathering of hesitation, only Kevin Nguyen acted with deliberate purpose. He kept his phone low, his hands steady, recording every word, every refusal, every insult, every moment that revealed the truth of what was happening. Kevin had witnessed enough small injustices in his time at Innovatech to know that the culture rewarded silence. Yet something inside him refused to let this moment disappear into the whispers of the lobby. He did not trust that the company would handle this fairly. He did not trust that leadership would hear the true story. He recorded because truth needed protection. Truth needed evidence. Truth needed someone willing to preserve it, even at personal risk. Greg Donovan, standing at the front of the crowd with arms crossed, repeated his warning that Naomi needed to leave. His voice carried a tone of finality, as though her presence alone was the problem and the solution. He insisted she was causing a disturbance. He insisted she was disregarding procedure. He insisted that she was elevating an accident into conflict. Every word echoed the deep structure of a culture that preferred order over accountability. Naomi listened with steady patience. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. She had spent her entire professional life navigating environments where her intelligence was questioned, her warnings dismissed, and her boundaries ignored. This moment was not new. It was simply louder, more public, more brutal in its clarity. Cole Bennett leaned against the counter, arms folded, ready to mock anything Naomi said. Haley Sullivan stood with her chin raised, satisfied with the authority she believed she held. Madison Reed hovered at the edge of the group, eyes darting between Naomi and her colleagues, desperate to maintain her place in their hierarchy. Tyler Brooks continued to film, his expression lit with the thrill of a viral moment unfolding in real time. The lobby had become a stage, and the cruelty displayed on it was not accidental. It was the reflection of deeper values, the logical outcome of a culture that tolerated bias as long as productivity remained high. As Greg gave yet another warning, Naomi lifted her chin and spoke clearly, each word steady, deliberate, and controlled. "I am Naomi Harper," she said. "I am the wife of Ethan Harper." The breath that followed seemed to pause the entire room. For a split second, the lobby froze. The circle around her stopped shifting, the phones lowered by instinct. Even the air felt still, as though the truth had struck the center of the room with quiet force. Then, breaking the silence with eager disbelief, Cole let out a loud burst of laughter. "You are the CEO's wife," he said, emphasizing each word with theatrical exaggeration. "And I am married to a superstar." His laughter spilled into the crowd, and the others followed. The sound spread through the lobby again, harsh, cutting, unrestrained. Tyler posted another update to Slack. "She says she is the boss's wife." Moments later, colleagues across the building responded with emojis and jokes, convinced that the claim was nothing more than a dramatic lie. Naomi did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She stood with a strength that defied the humiliation surrounding her. Grace's eyes filled with tears that did not fall. Malik felt his chest tighten with shame. Sophia felt guilt press against her ribs. Lauren shifted her weight as though ready to step forward, but remained still. Kevin kept recording because he knew the truth mattered more now than ever. The silence of witnesses became its own kind of violence, a quiet force that allowed cruelty to grow unchecked, and though most in the lobby did not yet understand it, their silence would become a chapter in this story that none of them could outrun. Because silence, once chosen, leaves a mark that does not fade when consequences arrive, and those consequences were already moving toward them, carried by truth, carried by justice, and carried by the man who would walk through the glass doors within minutes, ending the illusion that this moment held no weight. The lobby had grown into a rigid circle of silence and cruelty when the glass doors finally slid open, and Ethan Harper stepped inside with the calm confidence of a man who had spent years building a company from a dream, unaware that he was about to witness the most painful betrayal of his leadership. He had just finished an investor call, his mind focused on projections, partnerships, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion meeting scheduled for later that morning. But the moment he saw the frightened eyes of several employees turning toward him, he sensed something was wrong. He walked forward with a steady pace, scanning the room, trying to understand the strange stillness settling over the space that usually held morning chatter. And then he saw her. Naomi, his wife, the woman who had encouraged him, challenged him, grounded him, and stood by his side through every stage of his journey. She stood in the center of the lobby, soaked in coffee, coat stained, blouse clinging to her arms, trembling from humiliation and shock. A circle of employees surrounded her, some holding phones, some watching with thin smiles, others frozen in mute discomfort. The sight hit him with a force so sharp he felt the air leave his chest. Ethan crossed the lobby in 3 long strides, pushing through the crowd with a controlled urgency that shifted the entire atmosphere. "Naomi," he said, voice low and filled with quiet devastation. She lifted her eyes, and the pain he saw in them tore something open inside him. The lobby fell into a crushing silence as Ethan placed his hand on her arm with reverence, as though apologizing without words for every second she had endured alone. He turned to the crowd, his expression turning cold, focused, and dangerously calm. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice steady, but the sharp edge beneath it silenced the room completely. Greg Donovan stepped forward quickly, trying to reclaim control, insisting that there had been a misunderstanding, insisting that Naomi had been elevating the situation, insisting that his team had followed protocol. Ethan did not look at him. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi, reading everything she was not yet able to say. When he finally spoke, his words carried a power that cut through every excuse forming in the room. "That is my wife," he said quietly. The statement fell through the lobby like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of shock through every employee who had laughed, mocked, or remained silent. Several people lowered their phones at once. Others stepped back as though distance could erase their participation. Greg's face drained of color. Cole Bennett's smirk evaporated. Haley Sullivan looked down at the floor, speechless. Madison Reed trembled, her hands twisting together. Tyler Brooks froze, phone still raised, unable to hide behind the crowd any longer. Ethan turned slowly, sweeping the room with a gaze that held no anger, only a deep, chilling disappointment. "Who is responsible?" he asked. Not because he did not know, but because he wanted to hear it spoken aloud. Cole opened his mouth, ready to frame the moment as an accident. But Ethan raised a hand to silence him. "We will speak in the boardroom," he said. "All of you who touch this moment, human resources, legal, security, everyone, now." His voice never rose, but the weight of each word carried the force of final judgment. Dr. Valerie Brooks, the head of human resources, entered the lobby at that moment, alerted by the sudden flood of Slack activity and the whispers spreading through the building. Her eyes widened when she saw Naomi, when she saw the coffee stains, when she saw the fear in the crowd. She stepped forward with compassion and a quiet fury reserved for those who have witnessed too many injustices. "Come with me," she said to Naomi, her hand gentle but firm. "We will take care of you." Naomi nodded but looked back at Ethan, unsure whether leaving his side was the right choice. Ethan gave her a reassuring nod, a silent promise that he would unravel every thread of what had happened. Diego Morales, the company's in-house counsel, had already received copies of the Slack posts from concerned employees who wanted to distance themselves. He arrived with the steady urgency of a man who understood that the company's future had just collided with a moment of truth it could not escape. He signaled to Ethan that all relevant materials were being collected, including footage from the lobby's 4K cameras. Ethan responded with a single, decisive instruction. "Boardroom," he said again. "And I want everything." He took Naomi's hand for one brief moment, holding it with a strength that told her she was no longer standing alone in the cruelty she had faced. Then he released it gently and followed Greg, Cole, Haley, Madison, and Tyler down the hallway toward the glass-walled conference room. At that same moment, Kevin Nguyen stood in the back of the lobby, feeling the weight of what he held in his hand. He had recorded everything: the mockery, the refusal of help, the denial of restroom access, the laughter when she revealed her identity. He hesitated, not because he doubted the importance of the recording, but because he knew what sharing it meant for his future, his position, and his safety. Yet conscience guided him forward, with a quiet determination. He moved through the now frightened crowd and approached Ethan discreetly before the group reached the boardroom. "Mr. Harper," he said softly, "I have something you need to see." Ethan looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice, and nodded. Kevin handed him the phone, its screen glowing with the truth that no one could distort or hide. Ethan watched the first few seconds in silence, the color draining from his face as the reality became undeniable. "Send this to my office," he said, "and keep a copy for yourself." Meanwhile, Tyler's video, posted earlier in the morning as a joke, had already escaped the company's walls. A tech reporter from a local media outlet had messaged the company's press contact within minutes, asking for comment about the lobby incident. Unaware of the deeper story but ready to publish if silence followed, word traveled quickly, and as Ethan entered the boardroom, closing the glass door behind him, he knew there was no shielding the company from the truth. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a failure of culture, leadership, and accountability, a failure he never imagined he had unknowingly allowed to grow. The employees who had mocked Naomi, who had laughed, who had posted, who had stayed silent, felt the weight of what they had done settling on their shoulders. For years, they had operated under the assumption that the culture of Innovatech protected them as long as they stayed within its unspoken rules. But those rules were about to collapse. Ethan's expression made that clear. The era of silence was over. The era of consequence had begun. And every person in that room knew that the glass door closing behind them marked the beginning of a reckoning none of them were prepared to face. The glass-walled conference room became the silent arena where truth could no longer hide. And as the door closed behind Ethan Harper, Dr. Valerie Brooks, and Diego Morales, the weight of the morning bore down on every person summoned to face the evidence of their actions. Ethan stood at the head of the long, polished table, hands braced against its edge, breath steady, expression carved into a calm so cold it made the room itself feel smaller. Naomi had been taken to a private office to rest, her coat removed, her burns treated with care, her dignity gently restored by Valerie's quiet presence. But here, in this room, the cruelty shown to her would be examined without mercy. Diego connected the lobby's 4K security footage to the large screen, and the moment the first frame flickered into view, the tension thickened. There was Naomi, stepping into the lobby with a hopeful smile. There was Cole Bennett turning toward her with calculated intent. There was the deliberate spill of hot coffee, captured in perfect clarity. There was Haley Sullivan's laugh, sharp and immediate. Madison Reed's smirk, Greg Donovan's dismissive posture, Tyler Brooks raising his phone with excitement, The truth played out with no distortion, no missing context, no excuses left to cling to. Valerie pressed play again, letting the sound fill the room. Every insult, every refusal, every denial of help, every moment of silence from the crowd. Ethan watched without moving, his face unmoving but his eyes burning with a restrained fury that made every person at the table shift with discomfort. When the recording ended, Ethan lifted his hand and pointed silently to the chairs across from him. "Sit," he said. The word was quiet, but it carried the finality of a sentence. Cole lowered himself into a chair first, trying to look confident but failing as his leg shook uncontrollably. Haley sat with her hands clasped tight, her composure unraveling. Madison's eyes filled with tears she kept trying to blink away, though she knew they would carry no weight here. Greg chose the seat farthest from Ethan, his back straight, his pride bruised but still desperately clinging to authority. Tyler remained standing for a moment, unsure whether to sit or flee, then finally took a seat at the end of the table, his phone still in his hand, its screen dark and useless now that the truth was exposed. Diego opened a folder and laid out printed copies of Slack messages pulled from the random channel, Tyler's posts, the emojis, the comments, the jokes, the disbelief when Naomi revealed her identity. The entire company had been watching, laughing, reacting. Valerie added copies of past reports filed by employees who described hostile behavior from Cole and Haley. Warnings that had been dismissed or minimized by supervisors trying to maintain order at the expense of equity. "We ignored what we should have addressed," Valerie said softly, her voice calm but firm, her words directed not at Ethan, but at the entire room. "This is not an isolated act. This is a pattern. And today, it reached its inevitable breaking point." Ethan turned to Cole first. "Explain," he said. Cole swallowed hard, attempting a smile that collapsed under its own weakness. He called it a prank. He insisted he had not intended harm. He said Naomi startled him. He said the situation had spiraled beyond his control. Ethan did not respond. He turned to the screen again and pressed play on the moment Cole lifted the cup deliberately. Slowed down by Diego for clarity, the image left no room for interpretation. Cole's face drained of color. Haley broke down next, tears falling fast as she tried to soften her role. "I never meant for it to go so far," she said. "I thought she was someone trying to cause trouble. I did not know who she was." Valerie shook her head gently. "It should not matter who she was," she said. The truth of that statement hung in the air with absolute weight. Madison spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, admitting she had followed the others out of fear, a confession that revealed weakness but added no absolution. Greg, desperate to salvage his authority, blamed procedure. He said the lobby required order. He said Naomi did not cooperate. He said he acted to protect the company. Ethan's expression hardened at every word. "You protected nothing," he said quietly. "You failed at the most basic duty of leadership. You failed to protect someone who deserved care, respect, and dignity." When Ethan finally turned toward Tyler, the room felt as though the air had thickened. Tyler tried to call it a misunderstanding, tried to claim he only posted the video because he thought it would lighten the mood, tried to insist he never intended harm. Diego placed a printout of Tyler's older Slack messages in front of him, revealing a history of casual bias, jokes that were ignored, comments that should have been warnings. Tyler pressed his palms to his forehead, realizing that every careless word he ever typed had finally returned to confront him. Ethan straightened and addressed all five at once. "You did not simply mistreat a guest," he said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "You revealed what this company allowed itself to become, a place where cruelty is dismissed as humor, a place where silence replaces courage, a place where humanity is optional. He paused, letting the words settle into them. That ends today. Valerie handed each of the 5 a document. Termination packets. Immediate, final, irreversible. Greg received a suspension notice pending full investigation for negligence and misconduct. Cole and Tyler were informed of impending legal action. Haley and Madison were told their behavior constituted grounds for dismissal under every policy they had ever signed. No one argued, no one protested. The evidence spoke louder than any defense. Ethan then opened a company-wide Zoom session, his face filling the screens of all 500 employees. He did not hide the truth. He did not soften the blow. He told them exactly what had happened. He told them exactly why it was wrong. He told them that culture was shaped by choices, and for too long, the wrong choices had gone unchecked. He announced immediate reforms, mandatory training, anonymous reporting, an independent diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, a complete restructuring of the lobby and reception team. And he ended with a sentence that echoed through every floor of the building. Silence is not neutral. Silence protects harm. And this company will no longer allow silence to decide who we are. When he ended the call, the building felt different, lighter in some places, heavier in others. And for the first time, Innovatech Solutions understood that the cost of what happened that morning would reshape everything that came next. 4 months after the morning that shattered the illusion of safety inside Innovatech Solutions, the lives of the 5 employees responsible for Naomi Harper's humiliation lay in scattered pieces, each of them facing consequences they once believed would never touch them. Consequences delivered not by anger, but by the steady force of truth, accountability, and the public exposure they brought upon themselves. Cole Bennett. Once the self-assured receptionist who laughed as he poured hot coffee onto a stranger he believed he could demean without consequence, now spent his days navigating a slow legal collapse he could no longer outrun. Naomi's civil suit against him moved forward with precision, supported by high-quality video, witness statements, and the company's internal findings. Cole attempted to defend himself, insisting it was a misunderstanding, but attorneys dismantled his claims with careful clarity. His past social media posts, filled with biased jokes and careless remarks, were entered into the record, revealing a consistent pattern of behavior. The legal bills mounted faster than he could pay them. His savings evaporated. His credit collapsed. He moved out of his downtown apartment and into a smaller place far from the city, forced to take temporary work while attending court-ordered racial justice workshops that confronted him with truths he never once considered. He found himself sitting in uncomfortable silence, listening to the stories of people whose dignity he had once mocked, slowly realizing that the world he built in his mind no longer existed. And though he tried to tell himself that his downfall was unfair, he could not escape the recorded reality of the moment he chose cruelty over decency. Haley Sullivan faced her own reckoning. The video of her laughter, captured in crisp clarity, spread across social platforms within hours of the internal leak, gathering millions of views and triggering a wave of public outrage. Her name became a symbol of indifference and arrogance, a reminder of how easily cruelty is excused when directed at someone believed to be insignificant. She lost her job instantly, but the greater loss came afterward as her reputation collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny. Job interviews ended abruptly when employers recognized her from the viral clip. Friends who once supported her began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the notoriety she carried. Eventually, Haley recorded a public apology filmed from her living room. Voice trembling, eyes red, face bare. She spoke about remorse, about reflection, about understanding the harm she caused. The apology circulated widely, but the world had grown weary of apologies formed out of desperation. The community she once relied upon stayed silent. She moved back to her parents' home in the Midwest, spending long days alone, confronting the truth that her actions had reshaped her future in ways she never imagined. Madison Reed experienced a quieter but no less profound unraveling. She had been suspended for months, isolated from the professional community she once clung to, forced into long conversations with counselors who guided her through a deep examination of why she followed cruelty instead of resisting it. Unlike Cole or Haley, Madison did not face legal action or public exposure, but the internal investigation had revealed enough to leave her employment permanently terminated. She lost friendships she believed would last for years. Invitations stopped. Messages faded. She found herself alone in a silence she had never known. Reflecting on how fear of disapproval led her to join a moment of humiliation that would haunt her. She chose therapy not because anyone demanded it, but because she needed to understand the part of herself that surrendered compassion for acceptance. Over time, she began volunteering with community organizations focused on equity and conflict resolution, not as a form of redemption, but as a way to understand the cost of her silence. Her life did not collapse as dramatically as the others, but it changed in ways that forced her to confront who she had been and who she hoped to become. For Greg Donovan, the consequences were devastating. The investigation revealed years of ignored complaints, dismissed concerns, and a pattern of protecting those who contributed to a culture of quiet hostility. Former employees, emboldened by the shift in company leadership, stepped forward with stories of mistreatment and negligence. A class action suit formed quickly, naming Greg as a central figure in the systemic failures that had allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked. He lost his management credentials, his professional standing, and the network that once insulated him from accountability. He spent long days meeting with attorneys, reviewing documents, and facing accusations he had once dismissed without a second thought. His downfall served as a stark reminder that leadership carries responsibility, and when that responsibility is abandoned, the consequences reach far beyond a single moment of failure. Tyler Brooks suffered perhaps the most profound personal collapse. The internal investigation uncovered years of biased Slack messages, jokes that blurred into hostility, and comments that revealed a callous disregard for colleagues who did not fit his narrow comfort zone. When the investigation concluded, Tyler found himself alone in an apartment filled with the remnants of a life once driven by careless humor and digital bravado. The viral clip that exposed his participation spread rapidly, and the online community unearthed old comments he never expected the world to see. His professional reputation dissolved, leaving him unable to secure work in an industry where collaboration, trust, and character mattered deeply. Depression crept into his life with quiet persistence, leaving him isolated, unsure of who he was without the identity he once constructed through mocking humor. He stepped away from social platforms, from former colleagues, from the life he had built. And though he sought help through counseling, the weight of his own actions remained heavy, a reminder that every careless word spoken in a moment of cruelty carries the potential to unravel a future. Inside Innovatech Solutions, the transformation was swift and profound. Isabella Torres, the newly appointed head of diversity, equity, and inclusion, arrived with a clear vision and unwavering resolve. She rebuilt the reporting system, established independent oversight, and introduced a program that empowered employees to speak openly about bias without fear of retaliation. The anonymous reporting portal logged 62 cases within 4 months, proof of long-silenced voices finally being heard. Grace Park was promoted to senior product manager, recognized for her integrity and for having the courage to speak when others faltered. Malik Thompson was elevated to head of security, entrusted with reshaping the department around values of protection, dignity, and accountability. The company's culture shifted, not through slogans or surface-level changes, but through a renewed understanding that silence had allowed harm to grow unchecked. In the end, the events of that morning became a catalyst that forced Innovatech Solutions to confront itself. The downfall of those who acted with cruelty was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a transformation that reshaped the very soul of the company, proving that accountability, though painful, can lead to real change when truth is finally allowed to speak. 4 months after the morning that exposed the quiet cruelty woven through the walls of Innovatech Solutions, Naomi Harper returned to the same glass lobby that had once been the site of her deepest humiliation. But this time, she stepped through its doors, not as a visitor, not as a victim, but as a newly appointed board member entrusted with guiding the company through a future defined by accountability, dignity, and truth. The polished concrete floors still gleamed, but the atmosphere had changed in ways far more meaningful than the immaculate surfaces. The LED screens that once displayed revenue growth now shared space with a public diversity, equity, and inclusion dashboard, showing real numbers, real progress, and real faces, reflecting a commitment that went beyond rhetoric. The percentage of Black employees had risen from 4.2% to 7.1%. Response times for bias reports had improved dramatically. New hires represented a wider range of voices, backgrounds, and lived experiences. And etched into the glass wall behind the reception desk were the words, "Innovation thrives when everyone belongs," not as a slogan, but as a guiding principle shaped by the lessons of a painful past. Naomi paused for a moment as she took in the changes, feeling the quiet strength of progress settling around her like a long-awaited breath. Her sharp navy blazer caught the morning light, her high bun held with natural elegance. No trace of the coffee, no memory of the trembling humiliation, no shadow of the fear she once carried. The reception desk was staffed by new employees whose smiles held genuine warmth. "Good morning, Miss Harper," one of them said with respectful confidence, acknowledging her presence not out of obligation, but out of sincere recognition of her role in the transformation. As Naomi moved toward the elevators, she felt a sense of stillness inside her, a quiet affirmation that the pain she endured had become the seed of a much larger change. In the elevator, she met Grace Park, whose promotion to senior product manager had not only elevated her career, but also her sense of purpose. Grace smiled with a mixture of admiration and gratitude, her voice soft yet steady as she said, "Are you ready for the town hall? Everyone is waiting to hear you speak." Naomi returned the smile, feeling the truth of how far they had all come. Moments later, the elevator opened to the new security office where Malik Thompson, now the head of security, walked past with quiet authority. He nodded respectfully, carrying himself with a sense of dignity that came from leading with compassion and strength instead of fear or protocol alone. His department had been reshaped from the ground up, with new training centered on humanity, protection, and accountability. The culture he now led was built not on strict adherence to rules, but on the belief that protecting people was the foundation of real safety. Later that afternoon, Naomi stood backstage at a major San Francisco tech conference, waiting to deliver the keynote address that would define not only her new role, but also the moral compass the industry so desperately needed. The stage lights glowed softly. The crowd murmured with anticipation when she stepped into the spotlight. Thousands rose with applause, welcoming her with a reverence that reached far deeper than admiration. They recognized the courage it took to confront injustice not from a place of power, but from a place of vulnerability, and to transform that pain into a force that reshaped an entire institution. Naomi lifted the microphone with calm assurance, feeling the weight of her message settle gently across the room. And when she spoke, Her voice carried the clarity of lived truth. She told them that what happened to her was not an exception, but a symptom of a larger illness hiding in places that called themselves progressive. She told them that cruelty does not begin with violence, but with silence. She told them that dignity is not granted by position, but by the choices people make when they witness harm, and she delivered the message that had carried her through the darkest moments of that morning. The true value of life is not measured by what we achieve when everything is easy, but by the side we choose when we witness wrong. Her words moved through the crowd like a steady current. Some nodded, some wiped tears. All felt the weight of her truth. She reminded them that everyone faces two choices when they see injustice. They can stay silent to protect their own comfort, or they can speak even when their voice shakes, even when the cost feels high. Silence, she told them, is not neutral. Silence is taking a side. She acknowledged Grace, Malik, and Kevin as examples of those who chose conscience over fear. She acknowledged Ethan for choosing accountability over denial, and she reminded the audience that courage is not a grand gesture, but a daily decision to uphold the humanity of the person next to you. When the conference ended, the applause rose in a single, unified wave. People stood without hesitation, moved by her honesty and by the clarity of her message. That evening, Naomi and Ethan stood alone in the Innovatech lobby, the soft lights reflecting across the glass panels like distant stars. The building felt different, warmer, more human. Ethan reached for her hand with quiet gratitude, his voice gentle as he said, "You changed everything." Naomi shook her head softly, her smile warm and steady. "No," she said, "we changed it, together with everyone who finally chose not to stay silent." She looked toward the glass wall where a final message glowed in subtle lettering, a reminder of the company's new identity. The true measure of any society is how it treats those who are most vulnerable in its midst. The words shimmered in the quiet room, carrying the weight of both history and hope. Naomi rested her hand gently against the cool surface, feeling the calm certainty that the legacy she helped build would endure long after her story faded from headlines. For the first time since that painful morning, the glass lobby no longer felt like a place designed to intimidate, but a space where light could finally pass through without distortion. And as she walked out hand in hand with Ethan, she carried with her the truth she had earned through fire. When you witness injustice, silence is complicity, speaking up is humanity, and courage is always a choice, one that defines the highest value life can offer. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe. Your support truly matters.